There it is. Strawberries, things that make you go yum. And I love this picture because it's something I would really like to do, but I know I don't have the time and the expertise to do it. But a couple things to talk about on this first slide is that whoever did this obviously has control of all kinds of critters, including the birds. So I'm assuming that there's bird netting that's over it, or it's in an enclosure. And they've probably got some water system going with it, and they probably got some kind of soil system going with it, maybe even hydroponics, because you can do that with strawberries. So eventually I'll get there. One of these days I'd love to do that. A little bit of history about the strawberries first, and that is that they in the 1300s and 1400s, the alpine strawberries were brought into out from the French countryside into the estates. And that's what was first started there because they were so fragrant and so lovely. And then about 1600s, the Virginia strawberries, which were larger, reached Europe, and the strawberries were found, they're native to the U.S. The original ones were in the southeast, so they were brought over. They reached Europe, and the English had them, and then the French got them from the English. And about 1714, there was a French spy who went over to the Chilean, embassy, or what was passing for an embassy at that time, and stole some of the Chilean strawberries that they found and brought them back to France and England. And what they found out was those Chilean strawberries couldn't live anywhere other than the coast, so they were very fragile. So as with often happens, the Chilean strawberry and the Virginia strawberry were placed side by side. They cross-pollinated, and they came up with a hybrid. And that was our original strawberry that you see today, with a lot of crosses and hybridizations and developments, especially in New England. So that's the background of what you're eating today, something that's been developed by cross pollination many, many times. And if we have time later on, I'll tell you the story about first woman and first man in the strawberry, which is an old Cherokee legend, which I'm able to tell because somewhere back there I have an old Cherokee. Anyway, let's get on with it. One serving is a very healthy fruit. One serving has 140% of vitamin C, which is, and one serving is a cup of strawberries. So that's about 8 strawberries, and you've got 140% of what you normally have for vitamin C. I put a glycemic index in there for anybody who's diabetic because it's actually it's good for diabetes. It's one of the fruits that you can eat and not go over your sugar level. So it helps to prevent diabetes and cancer, and it helps prevent heart disease. So it's a very healthy fruit. It's got a lot of fiber in it. And you can read the trace minerals there. It's just loaded with all kinds of, not just the regular vitamin C, but all the trace minerals that you need that you don't even think about. And a huge assortment of vitamins. So very healthy fruit, something that if you can grow your own is even healthier. It's a member of the rose family, and if you take a look at the leaves when you're growing your strawberries, you'll notice that the leaves of roses and the leaves of strawberries are very similar. So that's something I didn't think about until I started researching a couple of years ago. It says that the U.S. is number one producer, but I'm not sure that's true anymore because I'm understanding that China has now surpassed the U.S. as the number one producer. So maybe we're number one in this United States, but not necessarily in the world. California produces about 80% of the strawberries that we eat, or that is, I hope we don't eat them, that is in the U.S. So, and the plants themselves last about 5 years. Now, some plants last longer than others. For example, the Tillamook strawberry lasts only a couple of years, where a Hood strawberry will last about 5. And as we said before, Native Americans had strawberries, and the Cherokee are one of the nations that did, but they're all throughout the Southeast. The strawberries grew where there was a fire, and they would show up in the wooded areas like mushrooms. Once the fire is done, the trees are cleared out. There's about, and you don't think about this, but if you look at the little dimples in the strawberries, there's about 200 seeds there. Luckily, they're not as big as blackberry seeds, so we don't have to worry too much about them. Why grow strawberries? Just look at that lovely plate of decadent strawberries. And strawberries themselves are a symbol of love. That's why they're given out during Valentine's Day. So because they are red and they're sometimes shaped in the form of a heart, so they're considered something of love and faithfulness and good for the home. The flavor is why we grow strawberries instead of getting them out of the stores. So nothing like a warm berry in your hand in the morning, and it doesn't even make it to the house. So never mind the cereal, just eat the strawberry. Freshness is a major thing with it, because when you pick your strawberries out of the garden, use a pair of scissors to cut the stem. Don't decap them as you're going along, because once you pull the caps off, they begin to disintegrate. So the strawberries, a lot of strawberries in the stores you'll see have been decapped, and so they're already starting to go. So the freshness is something. Once you pick them and don't decap them, just put them in, don't wash them, just put them in refrigeration immediately, and it stops them degrading. It also stops some of the molds from developing and continuing on with the rest of the berries. You probably picked up a box of strawberries in the store, and they already have mold developing on them. And if you have anything that started, Boitrus, I think, is the one I'm thinking about. If you have anything that started in your garden and you didn't notice a little speck of grayness in it, when you put it in the refrigerator, it stops that from spreading. So freshness is a key. When you're ready to process them or have them in a shortcake, or just eat them fresh or on cereal, or I digress, then wash the berries and then decap them and then process them. So that'll keep them fresh for you. Convenience. If you just want a few berries, if you want something on your cereal, if you want just a snack, you can go out and, especially with the day neutral berries, you can go out and just search the garden and pick up a few berries, and Bob's your uncle, there you are. You've got the berries. So they're very convenient once the season starts. And then there's jams and pies, and you can put them in salads, and you can freeze them, you can dry them. You can, from what I understand, you can even eat the green berries. I haven't tried that yet, but I'm tempted to try green berries in the salad, so we'll try. The bad news is, for anybody who buys them out of the store, they're number one on the list of Dirty Dozen, which is the list of fruits and vegetables that absorb or pick up or hold on to the sprays, or have a lot of sprays to them. And strawberries, because they don't have a skin on them like a banana does, whatever you spray on there is going to stay on there. So, and there are at least 20 different pesticides that growers will spray on the tomatoes. That's at least, there's up to 49 different sprays. And so that's what you're getting in the store. And they have to do that if they're going to have a commercial venture. So if you can find organics, I mean, that's better, but they're really pricey. So they're number one on the dirty dozen. You can certainly do better than commercial growers can do as far as keeping your berries clean. Types of strawberries. I've always thought there's red and there's white, and that's about it. But there are different types. So about 10 years ago, I started growing my different types of berries. I'll grow a June berry, and I'll grow a day neutral berry. And the June berry gives me all the berries that I could possibly eat in June and process and freeze and make jam and all of that. And the day neutral berries, because they produce throughout the spring and summer and into the fall, will give me a short amount of berries, some berries for my cereals, occasionally a shortcake or something. They'll produce a lot during June, which is what the other berries do, and I can combine them with that. And then they'll small production throughout the summer. If it gets too hot, they'll stop production. And then in the fall, I get another burst of strawberries. And if the rains hold off and don't get me moldy stuff in September, then I can actually have shortcake in September with my strawberries. So that's always a good thing. And I've put down the different varieties that are good for this area. And there are hundreds of different varieties, and they will produce later or earlier or whatever. But these are a good list of the June berry. The ones I grow are Shuxan. And if anybody knows Crawford berries that come to the farmers market in Longview, they're the ones, the sweet berries that you find from Crawford berries. So, and I've grown hoods, and they're a good berry. In fact, they're a little larger than Shuxan, and they're a little more firm too. Shuxans aren't soft, but they're a little softer than the hoods. So they're my preferred berry. You can pick out two different varieties of June berries, and some will be earlier and some will be later. So you can extend your berry season that way by combining two different kinds and getting berries into July. Seascape and TriStar I've grown also, and they both do really well here. Seascape is California berry. TriStar is from here. I got both of mine from Sagawas because they had them at the time and I could pick them up. The day neutral a lot of times are confused with everbearing. Everbearing or not everbearing. The day neutrals are everbearing, so it's a confusing thing. So the best thing to do is make sure of the variety that you've got. You might have to Google it and make sure that it's a day neutral, unless you want to grow everbearing. And everbearing will produce heavily in June with the rest of the berries, and then they won't produce, and then they'll produce again in fall. So that's why they're not truly everbearing. The day neutral are best for hanging or in containers, and the reason why for this is they don't produce a lot of runners. And if you think about how you're going to be using these berries, if you have them in a pot on your deck or in a what's showing there in a berry basket, you don't want the runners, but you would like berries during the whole season. So you'll have them right there during the whole season. They can also be grown hydroponically. And if you have enough light in your house, you can grow them inside your house. The strawberries don't need a second plant to grow with them, although it does help them. The male and female blossom or the blossoms are both male and female, let me put it that way. So you can have just one plant. It'll do better with a couple plants. It does need a pollinator or wind. So if you've got them in your house, then you might need to self-pollinate them if you're doing something like that. But they can grow about anywhere. And I'll tell you that with the June bearing, with the runners that they've got, I had them overrunning my landscaping area within a couple years, and I was picking berries like crazy. But they're very prolific. And we already talked about everbearing, so we're good on that. The alpines, and there's a picture there of the alpines. They're the original wood strawberry, and some people like them. I'm not real fond of them because they're too soft for me, and they're not. The flavor is very, to me at least, it was very mild. They do make a nice ground cover, and you can eat the berries. They're lovely in that. They'll fruit in partial shade, which is not something that the rest of the berries will do. So they do have that. They're definitely a woodberry. And you need to have them totally ripe to have any flavor at all. And most of them are just simply a plant. They won't produce the runners. You propagate them by dividing the plant itself. Growing your own strawberries. Choose the type. What would work for you? What do you want? Do you want a lot of berries? Everybody wants a lot of berries. Do you want berries continually? Everybody wants that too. So you can have more than one variety. Choose the variety that's right for this area. There are some varieties that do better in California than they do up here with our cooler, wetter climates. There are some varieties that are disease resistant. So if you have a problem with that, you might contemplate some of those disease resistant varieties. Choose the right quantity. Don't go out and buy, unless you're getting into production, don't go out and buy 100 plants because that's how many you need, because they'll set out those runners and pretty soon you'll have 600 plants. So choose the right quantity for your family. Generally speaking, it's 6 or 7 plants per person, and a little bit more if you do a lot of freezing or canning or want it for putting up. Choose the location. At least 6 hours of sun. They are sun lovers. And watch your sun as it tracks in the sky, because you'll have a lot of sun in June, but you might not have a lot of sun in March, April. So watch your trees, your buildings, everything that could produce shade. Make sure you've got 6 hours of sun. Elevate the soil. We are blessed with pottery making soil in this area. So if you have pottery making soil in your yard, think about getting some raised beds. Think about growing them in pots. Think about any other way to grow them other than in the ground soil. If you're going to grow them in the ground soil, elevate that soil so that you have a lot of mixed loam in there, mixed compost in there. Anything that helps it to drain, because they will, you'll get root rot. It won't be a happy thing for them. And the soil, like I said, should have compost. You can put sand in it as long as you have compost in it. Don't just add sand to the clay. You'll get bricks. So be aware of your soil and what you've got. It needs to be slightly acidic. And usually around this area, that's not a problem, but I would suggest having your soil tested to find out exactly what you've got in that soil. Go down 6 to 12 inches. Don't go any lower, because 6 to 12 is where your roots are going to be. And if you go lower, the pH will change. The pK out of the NPK will change also. So you'll have differences below that soil. So 6 to 12 inches is ample. Make sure you have access to water. If this place that you're going to put your strawberries is out in a field somewhere and you don't have water to it, you're going to be hard pressed to get water going, because they require water when they're growing and to grow those berries. And they require water when you put the plants in to grow those plants. So you need access to water. Make sure you have a hose that will reach out to wherever you're doing. Site free of verticillium susceptible plants, and that means anything in the nightshade family. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, any of those. 3 years, you need to have those plants out for 3 years before you put your strawberries in. Spring is the usual time that we plant strawberries. In this area, fall is a better solution because it will grow the roots. But since you can't get the plants usually in fall, then spring is the usual time to put them in. The other areas that have a colder climate, fall is not an option. So if you're up in elevation somewhere, then spring is the best time for you. Arrange the patch, hill or matted rows, and I'll show you some designs of that. That's usually what throws most people, but it's really not hard, and there are reasons for it. The right height between the crown and the root, I'll show you a picture of that. We'll talk about that in a minute or so. And when you're creating your hole to put your plant in, make sure the hole is big enough to spread those roots out. And put a little mound of soil in the middle so that the crown itself sits on that soil and the roots spread down throughout the hole. So it's got a little mound to set on for the root. That helps keep the root from rotting. Plant on a cloudy day or late afternoon. Give it a little time and make sure it's not stressed out from too much sun. I get stressed out from too much sun. Mulch if there are no slugs. If you have an issue with slugs, I mean a real issue, then put plastic down to keep those slugs from getting up in the mulch and ruining your strawberries. You can also think about cardboard and straw. And by the way, strawberries, the name doesn't come from strawberry. It comes probably from strewn berry, because the way it lays out and the way it propagates. So just a little side on there. The June-bearing strawberries, when you plant them in the spring, you will be picking off the blooms. I'm sorry. That's just the way life is. Your plant has to grow. So in order to help the plant grow, you need to pick those blooms off so it doesn't send all the energy into the berry and into the bloom. If you're planting in the fall, you don't have to do that. You can actually plant the plants, fertilize the plants, have it winter over, and then that spring it's ready to go for the first picking. If you plant in the fall, do not fertilize in the spring, because what you will get is a lot of vegetation and not a lot of berries. If you are planting in the spring, pick the blooms off, fertilize, and remove the runners. Okay? So you're sending all the energy to the plant, and the fertilizer goes to the plant and the vegetation. And then you'll fertilize again in the fall to get it going during the fall season. The next year, after you have planted your strawberries in the spring, the following spring, do not fertilize in the spring, and you're good to go with your berries. and you will follow along with that schedule where you're actually going to do a few things and renovate and get them ready for the fall. But we'll get into that in a minute. First year, add a balanced fertilizer before planting, and then again in 4 to 6 weeks, and in August, and then during renovation. And I'll talk about renovation here in a minute. The everbearing or day neutral, you can pick the bloom. You must pick the blooms off, but only until July 1st. And after that, let the blooms go and you can have your berries. So that's one advantage of having two different varieties of strawberries, because you're picking all the blooms off, but your day neutral are over here, and you're actually getting strawberries in the summer and the fall. Remove runners after the daughter plants develop. Now, the first year, when you're fertilizing your plants, you're picking off the runners, but you're letting some of the runners develop. And believe me, at least in the shuck sand, I may have 10, 12, 15 runners going during the year. So I need to pick about 4 of them or 6 of them the first year and not pinch them off or not cut them off. And those are going to be my new plants for next year. And you'll see it in the matted row system. You'll see how that works. Plant 18 inches apart, closer if fewer runners. I've seen 18 inches. I've seen 2 feet. I did about 20 inches apart. And that seemed to work out really well because I had a matted row within 1 year. I mean, I had strawberries all over the place. Water regularly and frequently when fruit is forming, not necessarily when it's ripening, because you don't want watery berries. You want big fruit. So while the fruit is growing, please water if you have to. Now, this, again, is April, May, and most of the time we don't have to water. But if it cuts off and we have a week of lovely sunny weather, then you need to water. That's the downside of having lovely weather in the springtime. But when the fruit starts to ripen and you see those berries start to turn color, don't water anymore. Let them develop the fruit flavor. The same goes for cantaloupe, by the way. If anybody's grown cantaloupe and tomatoes, if you want cantaloupe that really tastes really good and tastes like cantaloupe, don't water the last couple weeks. Let it go, and it will develop the flavor. Don't fertilize in the spring of a fruiting year. We just talked about that. And don't fertilize wet plants. Fertilize when the plants are dry, and water in immediately after that. So the fertilizer doesn't, if it gets there, it doesn't get stuck. Don't water in the evening. That develops diseases. So you want to do most of this in the morning time after the plants have dried out. Here we go. Okay. Matted row system. This is for June bearing berries. This is, you'll see the design on the left-hand side. This is for 2 rows. And if you just have 1 row, then that's what you've got. You've got plants that are 2 feet apart. I didn't quite adhere to this. I offset them a little bit and made sure they were 20 inches apart, so they were kind of staggered in kind of a Z shape. And that worked out pretty well, except I have a whole lot of tomato plant or strawberry plants that I have to probably pull up and thin out. So the reason why you want them 18 inches to 2 feet apart, if you look over on the right-hand side, see all those light green strawberry plants? I keep saying tomato. Strawberry plants, those are the runners. that will develop, and you just stick them into the ground, and once they've rooted in and you're into summertime, you can cut the runners from the mother plant and they will develop as their own plants. So within a year, if you have just a few plants that you've bought, you're going to have a whole lot of plants. It's going to be matted down by the time you get the summertime hits. So you'll have a lot more strawberry plants than you bought. They're prolific. And this is for the June varieties. So, and one of the other things that is suggested to keep some of the diseases away is to, once you get the matted row done, and it's fairly narrow, it's about 4 feet across, put those runners over the edge of a raised bed so that they're not matted inside, the extra ones aren't matted inside the raised beds for air circulation. So if you want more air circulation, be aware of how crowded everything is. Here's the hill system. This is day neutral. And if you'll look at the drawing on the left-hand side, they're only a foot apart. And this is because they don't have any or very few runners. So you'll have 1 or 2 runners maybe. That's what I've been seeing with my TriStar and my Seascape. So you're not going to have a matted system. It will be much less. And if you look over on the right-hand side, it says hedgerow systems. This is pretty much how you can space them out. They're not nearly as prolific as the June berries are. They don't have as many berries. They don't have as many runners. They're more containable and controllable. They put out not as much fruit, but it's spaced out over an amount of time. So it's going to depend on if you have raised beds, if you're putting them out on the ground, which is raised also if you're doing it right, or if it's hydroponics or if it's in pots. It's just do what works best for you. Keep in mind that if they're too crowded, you're going to have issues with diseases and air circulation and all of that. So we'll have discussions, I'm sure. Okay, how do you plant the strawberry plants? When you get them, they probably won't have any leaves or berries or fruit on them. You'll have a thickened part that's above the roots, and that's the crown. And the idea is to plant the crown about halfway down, so it's not totally covered and it's not totally exposed. And laying the roots out in the hole with a mound of soil in the middle so that crown butt hits that soil, and then covering it over so that the crown is halfway covered. That's the ideal planting. It's not hard to do. It's just you have to keep that crown in mind that it's halfway buried. Pests. And that's me crying up at the top because of the pests. Slugs, crown moth, aphids, cyclamen mite, garden root, thripes, millipedes. All of this is, and the millipedes was this year. There is a new bug that people have been writing in for the, I guess the Plant and Insect Clinic, Alice, that they've been complaining about that. So
Yes.
millipedes seems to be the newest one. And with the millipedes, and possibly with some of the others also, one of the suggestions is to put a barrier between the the soil and the strawberries. And mulch and straw have come up. You have to watch for slugs on those. Cardboard is another option where it puts a barrier between between the millipedes and your strawberries. And millipedes are down in there getting rid of some of the compost, chewing up the compost, so it's soil again. So it's and it also helps to keep the soil from splashing up on your strawberries. That creates a lot of the molds and mildews and diseases also. So not a bad idea to get some kind of compost, some kind of straw and maybe cardboard. I'm going to try cardboard this year because that's a possibility. One of the things that is good is the strawberries create a polyphenol, which is a very healthy thing to create. It helps us too. And one of the reasons they do this is a mechanical type wounding to their leaves. So if you see things like spider mites and whiteflies, which are only going to hurt the leaves, that's actually helping to increase the taste and the chemical in the strawberry that's healthy for us. So not all bugs are bad. And in a chemical warfare type situation, which a lot of commercial people have to do, those white flies and those mites are killed off also. So I would say if you see that, don't worry about it. If it's just making mush or chewing your leaves a little bit, even a caterpillar that's chewing on a leaf or a bird that gets a leaf, that's a mechanical wounding, and that will help increase the flavor and the polyphenols of the strawberry, which is really strange, but it works. There are other things that you can do with some of the mechanical, some of the pests that you see. I won't go into it too deeply because we would be another 2 or 3 hours on everything that you have to do. But I have some places where you can go and look and see the different varieties of pests and determine what you need. One of the other things that the main thing with pests on strawberries is, of course, birds, and which I don't have down here simply because it's such a big category. I want to talk about it rather than just show it to you. The best deterrent for the birds is bird netting. And when you put your bird netting on, don't put it on at the beginning of the year because pollinators need to get in there. And it's more difficult. They can still make it, but you won't have happy pollinators. They'll go somewhere else. But put the bird netting on when you start to see some color on your strawberries. That's the time to do it. And make sure that bird netting is sealed all the way around, because I've seen robins find a hole in my 2x4s that I use for sealing the edges and get in there and eat my strawberries, and they'll eat full strawberries. And there are other birds that like them too. Robins will eat whole strawberries. Some of the other birds will just take a peck out of it, and that does the same thing. So bird netting. Yeah, you can. I've seen on the internet where you can paint rocks red and fool them into thinking those are red berries, and they'll go somewhere else. I don't know if I'd try that. It might work. It might not. I don't want to test the theory. So I've got bird netting, and that pretty much keeps everything out as long as I seal it. Diseases. Oh, heck, there's a lot. Fruit rot, wilt, mildew, leaf spot, anthracnose, on and on and on. The best And this is why growers have at least 20 different varieties of pesticides and herbicides. The best thing you can do is do some due diligence up front. Make sure that your soil is right. You water at the right time. You don't overhead water. You make sure there's enough air circulation. You pick off the bad berries. I pick the bad berries off with one hand, and I harvest with the second hand. If you have a plant that's bad, like this one down here, I think that's Fusarium wilt. If you have a plant that's bad, pull the plant. Don't necessarily put it in your compost bin unless you heat that compost bin up to the temperature that's required to kill off all the bacteria and nasties that are growing on it. But throw the plant away and don't replant in there because the soil may be contaminated. So, keep your eye on that. But most of the time, you're going to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And that's the price of growing strawberries organically or as organically as you can. There are some sprays that are not chemical sprays. You can use them safely, and I've got some websites to look at for those. Also, try and identify what's going on, and if you don't know, then contact Plant and Insect Clinic, and they'll give you a heads up on what's happening with it. I think the top one is Botrys. And this is something else. I don't know. There's so many. So don't let that put you off. Just make sure that your soil is right, you're watering correctly, it's got full sun, good air circulation. If it's a happy plant, a lot of times it can throw itself off on this. The other thing to do is if you buy plants from a nursery, which I would recommend over a big box store, make sure that what you're buying doesn't have any root rot on it, any fungus or mold or mildew on it. And if it does, don't buy it. There are ways that you can kill off a lot of that stuff if you buy something that's got it on it. And that requires some heating and some boiling water and some other ways of doing it. So just get good plants that are healthy first off. And once you get your plants, soak them in, soak the roots just before you're going to plant for about an hour to plump them up in regular water, not hot. So that'll help get them off to a good start, and then water them in well. And I think we're stuck. There we go. And here's what I was talking about before. Your plants are going to live to be about, and give you good fruit, anywhere from 2 to 5 years, depending on the variety of the plant. So when your strawberries are getting smaller and it's been about 4 years, it's time to renew the strawberry plants. But your daughters will help with that. The older plants, I can tell you, will develop a thick taproot to them. And the daughters are the next year's plants. So if some of your plants are starting to get older, you can use the daughters from those plants and keep the patch going for another few years. After about 8 to 10 years, your soil is going to need to be renewed. And because the strawberries have used up the nutrients that they need, so you need to find another bed. So rotate your beds. And one of the good things that you can rotate to is a bed that's had broccoli in it, because broccoli has a compound in it that if you have any charcoal rot, which is one of the diseases, it has a compound that resists that. So if you put those strawberries in the bed that had the broccoli in it, that helps eliminate that disease. There are all kinds of funny ways with strawberries. Plant disease-free plants, we talked about that. The June bearing, how do you harvest those? How do you refresh those? After they have had all the berries, done all the berries, and if it's the first year, it will be after it will be about June, or it will be July, about July 1st. But after they've done all their production, then it's time to shear them. And if you've got a large matted bed, you can actually run a lawnmower over them, as long as you don't bring it down so close that it cuts the top of the crown off. What I do with mine, since mine are in a raised bed, I will pull them up like a hair knot, like a bad hair day, and I will cut off all the extra leaves, all the leaves and all the runners and all of that, all the dead leaves especially, and leave the crown, because in the next couple weeks, that crown is going to produce new leaves, because it's done with the berries and now it's producing new leaves for the next year. So by cutting off all of those old leaves and runners, you have removed all the old dead stuff that's just going to hang on through the next year, and that'll refresh your strawberry plants. And then take those, and you can, as long as you don't have any diseases on them, you can compost them. Don't overhead water. That's one of the main things with the molds and the rots and everything, is you need to have some kind of drip system or some kind of hose system that just delivers the water to the roots. And if you have mulch, you can put your hoses underneath that mulch, and it will not hit the plants. Pick the bad and overripe fruit. I have chickens who wait at the gate for me to give them all the bad and overripe fruit, and they talk to me the entire time I'm in the strawberry bed. So pick that, and I pick mine with one hand, and then I harvest any kind of good berries with the other hand. If you want to go through twice and do it that way, that's fine. And don't plant where berries, nightshade family, lettuce, spinach was grown for 3 years. That's because of the diseases. And there's the broccoli or mustard has been, and it's the charcoal rot that's eliminated or cut down by the broccoli. Airflow is a main thing. You need to get air in there so it doesn't have the molds build up. And yeah, pesticides or herbicides as a last resort, or shotgun with the robins that are getting your berries. I don't know. Harvest dry plants. When you're harvesting your berries, harvest in the morning, but wait till that dew's gone, because anytime you harvest a wet plant, it's going to add to the diseases, the molds and mildews. Like I said, leave the cap, keep the berries cool, wash just before using, and I'm going to try the green berries in the salads. And pick, I've seen picking every other day, but I don't know if that stresses the plant or not. I've also seen that. So based on how many red berries you're getting, you may do every other day picking. You may do once every 3 to 5 days. On my day neutrals, I found that it was every 3 to 5 because they didn't have that many berries. And if I waited for a 5-day, then a 3 to 5 day, I was good. If I saw rains coming in, I would pick the day before, just keep the rains off. Because strawberries do not ripen once you pick them. They are already as ripe as they're going to be, and unlike an apple, they're not going to get any riper. So pick them when they're ripe. Oh, rejuvenating Juneberry. This is what we're talking about. Also, thin the plants to about 6 inches apart. that's more that air circulation. Mow or clip tops to 1 to 2 inches above the crown within 1 week of the last harvest. I usually don't get out there in time. I'm usually 1 to 2 weeks, but it works. Remove the debris, and then is the time to fertilize. And fertilize in the morning, wet it down, and they'll be good to go for a while. Work the mulch into the soil. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Okay, now what I've done here is instead of putting long addresses for the sites that you can go to, one of them is short enough. Strawberryplants.org has some just good advice for people who are doing this as a home garden thing. So they've got a lot of information.
Okay.
The others are so long that I've put out what you should Google, and it'll get you right there the same way. And you don't have to do all the typing. So if you go to Google, WSU strawberries, OSU strawberries, University of Minnesota strawberries, or University of Maine strawberries, Bulletin 2067, the University of Maine will come up with several different items, and the first one on the list is the bulletin, so I put the bulletin in there. But it's a little bit easier to do it that way than it is to try and type out that long string of addresses. If you want the long string of addresses, once you Google that, then you'll have the long string of addresses. You can add it to your bookmark.